Blake Lively might be facing one of the messiest moments of this entire saga right now. And honestly, this twist? Yeah, not many people saw it coming. So here's the tea. Blake Lively and her legal squad reportedly walked into a Manhattan courtroom yesterday. And according to the New York Times, this may actually be her last real shot. Her final opportunity to make something land using the California law her entire comeback narrative has apparently been leaning on. But just when it starts looking like maybe, just maybe, she could pull something out of this chaos, the woman who actually helped create the law suddenly steps in and basically says, "Not like this." Ouch. That is not just awkward. That is spectacularly bad timing. Let's rewind for a second because there are several layers to this story, and every single one matters. Blake Lively's legal team has reportedly been relying heavily on California Civil Code 178. 7. An anti-harassment law originally designed to protect everyday people from intimidation by those with greater money, power, or influence. The woman credited as the architect behind the bill is Victoria Burke, a professor and attorney who strongly believed this law could help survivors. But now, Victoria has publicly expressed frustration. In a statement, she reportedly said she never imagined her legislation would become wrapped up in controversy like this. She reaffirmed her belief in the law itself, but also said she was unhappy seeing it allegedly used as what she described as a PR redemption strategy by Blake Lively's team. She also reportedly questioned whether attorney fees should even be granted here. And when the person who helped build the rulebook starts questioning how it is being used, people pay attention. That is not nothing. Here's the bigger issue. This law was introduced in 16 states and referenced in major cases because it was meant to help people without expensive publicists, powerful lawyers, or Hollywood-level resources standing behind them. And now here comes the part making people raise their eyebrows. Blake Lively, arguably one of the most connected and resourceful women in Hollywood, is suddenly the public face of a law originally meant to protect people without power. Meanwhile, Victoria Burke is reportedly watching years of legislative work become tangled in what she appears to see as a PR battle, and she is not staying silent about it. Honestly, that takes nerve because she absolutely could have avoided the spotlight and said nothing, but she didn't. Now let's get into what Blake Lively's legal team is actually asking the court for, because this goes far beyond simply covering attorney fees. They reportedly entered that courtroom seeking a mini-trial. Yes, an actual mini-trial complete with expert witnesses and testimony, all to determine how much money Blake should receive after a case that had already been settled. Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively resolved the case. No jury weighed in. No judge issued a ruling on the core claims. The case settled. Yet now, Blake's team is reportedly standing before Judge Lyman arguing for substantial damages anyway, including attorney fees, compensatory damages, and even treble damages. And let's just say Judge Lyman did not appear completely sold on the pitch. Based on courtroom reports, he reportedly pushed back, questioning whether Blake's team had actually established malice, which is considered a major legal hurdle. He also reportedly challenged whether the claimed damages had truly been proven. At one point, he seemingly suggested a simpler path, that Blake could limit the request to attorney fees and move on. But her team reportedly declined that exit and kept pushing for the full package. Critics argue that is where the real conversation begins, because some believe this has shifted beyond justice and into optics. The thinking goes that even a symbolic financial win could be framed publicly as a victory. Headlines matter, narratives matter, and many people closely following this case think they understand exactly what strategy may be unfolding here. But somehow, the legal drama gets even messier. Constitutional and First Amendment attorneys are now reportedly weighing in, and some appear genuinely concerned about the wider implications. Now here is where this entire situation starts getting seriously complicated. Imagine someone publicly accuses you of something as damaging as sexual assault or harassment. You believe the claims are completely false, harmful to your reputation, and you decide to fight back in court. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, critics say not so fast. Under the concerns being raised here, you could potentially end up paying the other person's legal fees if the case fails to go your way, even if large portions of your own claims are dismissed along the process. Not because a jury officially ruled against you, not because a judge fully decided the facts were on the other side, but because the case may not have unfolded in exactly the way required to avoid fee shifting. One legal expert quoted by the New York Times explained it pretty bluntly. He reportedly argued that if someone feels falsely accused of something incredibly serious and believes they have a strong legal case, situations like this may cause them to think twice before filing suit because the financial risk suddenly becomes massive. And that exact chilling effect on legitimate defamation claims is reportedly one of the biggest concerns critics have about how Blake Lively's team is allegedly applying this law. This is not just legal theory or courtroom drama for headlines. Critics argue it could affect real people who are nowhere near Hollywood and have absolutely nothing to do with Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni. Meanwhile, Victoria Burke, the attorney and professor who reportedly fought to create this law to protect vulnerable individuals from powerful people, is now watching it potentially become shaped by a case some believe turns that entire idea upside down. And honestly, this is where many observers say the bigger picture starts feeling uncomfortable. Critics argue this law was originally designed for someone facing overwhelming power, money, and influence, not necessarily someone with celebrity-level resources. It was reportedly intended for people without expensive PR teams, media access, or major Hollywood connections. Some observers even point to Reynolds' influence and public reach as part of why this debate has intensified. Meanwhile, critics claim Blake Lively is now using a legal framework in ways that even its alleged creator appears uncomfortable with, all while seeking financial recovery after a case that already settled. And speaking of the New York Times, there is another layer people keep revisiting because timing matters. Critics have long debated how the original reporting involving Justin Baldoni rolled out, arguing he had little opportunity to publicly respond before headlines spread everywhere. Many observers felt the early framing heavily favored Blake from the beginning. Now even the New York Times is reportedly describing this courtroom appearance as Blake's last chance under an untested law, and that wording has definitely caught attention. The same outlet many believed leaned toward her perspective earlier is now reportedly treating this as a difficult uphill fight. That shift alone has people paying closer attention, especially after Judge Lyman reportedly questioned whether malice had actually been established. Judge Lyman also reportedly questioned whether the damages being requested were actually real, measurable, and properly backed up. And here is the part people keep talking about, because from courtroom accounts, he appeared to offer Blake Lively's legal team what some observers viewed as a fairly clean off-ramp. The suggestion reportedly being that if Blake simply stopped pursuing damages beyond attorney fees, this entire dispute could potentially wrap up without much more drama. But apparently, that was not the route her team wanted to take. Instead, they reportedly continued pushing for everything: the mini-trial, the expert witnesses, the testimony, the compensatory damages, even treble damages, the full package. And that decision has raised eyebrows, because all of this is happening after a case where no jury ever reached a verdict. No courtroom showdown ended with a final ruling on the broader claims. The case settled. Meanwhile, many of Justin Baldoni's claims were dismissed, though critics point out those dismissals were not necessarily final determinations on every factual issue. Even so, Judge Lyman reportedly made comments suggesting certain allegations did not meet the standard for established workplace harassment. So now, here is the picture people are staring at: a judge who appears skeptical, the reported architect of the law publicly expressing discomfort with how it may be applied, constitutional and First Amendment attorneys raising concerns over what kind of precedent this could create. And despite all of that, Blake Lively's team is still reportedly standing in court asking for the broadest possible outcome. You almost have to pause and admire the confidence because, wow, they are not exactly playing it safe. Now, the Civil Code 178. 7 issue itself is fascinating because this law has reportedly never faced scrutiny quite like this before. It was introduced in 16 states, received attention as an important legal tool for harassment victims, and gained a reputation as meaningful legislation. But it has not really been tested in a federal courtroom this high profile, where every argument is being dissected by powerful legal teams from every possible angle. Critics argue the way Blake Lively's team is reportedly trying to combine attorney fees with compensatory and punitive damages, all at once represents an especially aggressive interpretation of what the statute might actually allow. In other words, observers say they are not playing cautiously here. They appear to be pushing this law to its absolute limit. And here is where things could get seriously messy. Because if Judge Lyman rules against this interpretation, critics argue it may actually limit how this law gets used in future situations, especially cases involving people the legislation was originally meant to protect. You have to imagine Victoria Burke watching all of this unfold with mixed feelings. She reportedly spent years helping push this law into existence because she believed in its purpose. And now, the biggest and loudest public test of that work involves Blake Lively pursuing damages after already settling a lawsuit with a Hollywood director. Critics argue that probably was not the story this law was ever meant to tell. What makes it even more interesting is that Victoria reportedly chose to speak publicly on her own. Nobody dragged her into the spotlight. Nobody forced a statement. Many people in her position likely would have stayed silent, avoided the controversy, and let the legal drama unfold from a distance. But she spoke up anyway, and many observers believe that decision says a lot. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Blake Lively seemingly had an exit from all of this that avoided reopening every criticism people already had. The lawsuit settled. The legal battle appeared finished. She could have quietly stepped back, focused on rebuilding her public image over time, and allowed the headlines to cool down naturally. Plenty of public figures take exactly that route. Instead, her team reportedly returned to court asking for more: a mini-trial, treble damages, punitive awards, and additional financial recovery after the settlement had already happened. And critics argue that move has unintentionally dragged attention back onto everything people were already questioning. The early media narrative, the way Justin Baldoni was reportedly portrayed before he had much chance to respond publicly, the timeline that some observers viewed as suspicious. Suddenly, those conversations are back in the spotlight because Blake Lively's team appears determined to keep fighting for a courtroom victory. Then there is the so-called Wayfarer lawsuit, the case reportedly filed involving a publicist and others tied to media strategy surrounding Justin Baldoni's public image. That legal battle raised difficult questions about possible coordination between PR efforts and reporting. And critics point out those concerns did not magically disappear simply because the main lawsuit settled. If anything, many believe this fee hearing has pushed those questions back into public discussion louder than before. And yes, this also places Ryan Reynolds back into the conversation. Some observers believe that if there was a larger coordinated media strategy behind the scenes, Ryan's role cannot simply be ignored because Blake is the person appearing in court. His relative silence lately has stood out to many people, especially considering how publicly supportive he appeared early on. For some critics, that silence feels different now than it did several months ago. But to be fair, it is important to consider what Blake Lively's supporters would likely argue here. Many would say she genuinely experienced something serious during production and had every right to speak up about it. Supporters of Blake Lively would likely argue she had every reason to pursue legal action. They would probably say the settlement itself suggests Justin Baldoni's side wanted the situation over and done with. And honestly, those arguments are not entirely unreasonable. A settlement does not automatically prove guilt or innocence for anyone involved. Cases settle for all kinds of reasons: financial strain, reputation concerns, legal exhaustion, or simply because everyone wants the chaos to end. So no, critics are not necessarily saying the settlement somehow proves Blake fabricated everything. But here is where even the most sympathetic interpretation of her situation reportedly runs into serious trouble. Judge Lyman reviewed the claims in detail. He looked closely at what was being presented as workplace harassment, and according to courtroom reports, he did not simply dismiss concerns on procedural grounds alone. He reportedly made direct observations about the substance of those allegations. Specifically, he suggested much of what had been presented failed to meet the legal threshold for workplace harassment. And that matters, arguably a lot, because this is not just a paperwork issue. Critics point out that it means a judge reviewed the evidence presented by Blake Lively's own legal team and still questioned whether it truly held up under legal scrutiny. That becomes especially important when someone is simultaneously seeking financial damages tied to claims of victimization. So now, Blake Lively's team reportedly finds itself in a difficult position. They are asking for significant financial recovery in a case where the judge has already questioned whether key allegations were sufficiently supported, where the law being used was allegedly created for a very different kind of vulnerable person, where the reported architect of that law has openly expressed discomfort with how it is being applied, and where no jury ever actually heard the full case or reached a conclusion. And somehow, all of this is unfolding publicly, with reporters, legal commentators, cameras, and even the New York Times closely watching. Which means every extra hearing, every courtroom update, and every legal argument keeps this story alive in the public eye. And judging by reactions coming out of court, many observers believe public opinion does not appear to be moving in Blake Lively's favor. Judge Lyman's reported skepticism was noticeable enough that legal analysts quickly picked up on it. Because when a judge appears to hand one side a relatively clean exit, and that team still refuses to take it, people start asking questions. Are they incredibly confident in an argument many outsiders see as shaky? Or are they so focused on securing a public victory that they are willing to risk an extremely public defeat? And honestly, after everything people say they have watched unfold over the past several months, many critics believe they already know which explanation sounds more believable. Because here is the uncomfortable reality of what losing this hearing could actually mean for Blake Lively's team. It would not simply be another courtroom setback. Critics argue it could become the final chapter in a narrative that has not unfolded the way her camp may have originally expected. According to many observers closely following this saga, the early strategy appeared aimed at getting ahead of any fallout surrounding the It Ends With Us press tour controversy, positioning Blake Lively as the wronged party, using legal pressure alongside favorable media attention to frame Justin Baldoni as the villain, and ultimately walking away with her public image mostly protected, perhaps even with a settlement that could quietly be presented as a win. At least critics argue that seemed to be the plan. But things reportedly have not played out that way. Justin Baldoni's legal team pushed back harder than some expected. The so-called Wayfarer lawsuit raised uncomfortable questions about media strategy and public relations tactics. Portions of Blake's case were dismissed. The settlement happened without any formal public ruling fully validating her position. And now, somehow, she is reportedly back in court still trying to pull something more from a battle many people assumed had already ended. Even Judge Lyman, according to courtroom observers, appears to have questioned why this fight continues. Meanwhile, Victoria Burke's remarks are not likely disappearing anytime soon. Every time this hearing gets discussed, every time someone reports on what Blake Lively is seeking, and every time legal commentators debate how this law is being applied, Victoria's criticism will reportedly keep resurfacing. Because when the person credited with helping build the legal framework publicly says she is uncomfortable with it allegedly being turned into a PR recovery strategy, that statement tends to stick. Critics argue it makes things significantly harder for Blake Lively's team to frame this as a purely principled legal battle tied to protecting harassment victims, especially when the reported creator of the law appears to be signaling something very different. And beyond the celebrity drama, the legal chaos, and the endless online arguments, many observers say they genuinely hope Victoria Burke continues speaking publicly. Why? Because she reportedly understands this law better than almost anyone. She knows why it was created. She knows who it was intended to protect. And if she truly believes it may be applied in ways that move beyond its original purpose, many argue her voice could become incredibly important, not only for this case, but for how the law gets interpreted in future situations as well. Because here is the bigger issue critics keep circling back to. If the most high-profile use of Civil Code 178(7) ultimately turns into a cautionary story about a wealthy celebrity allegedly using it to secure a public relations victory after an already settled legal battle, many observers worry that the consequences could stretch far beyond Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni. Critics argue the real damage would fall on future cases involving genuinely vulnerable people trying to rely on the law for exactly what it was reportedly created to do. And according to many legal observers, that is the actual risk people should be paying attention to here. Not celebrity reputations, not Hollywood headlines, not the non-stop entertainment drama surrounding this story. The deeper concern, critics say, involves the very people. Victoria Burke reportedly had in mind when helping create this legal protection in the first place, individuals needing safeguards against people with greater money, influence, and power. Because if this case somehow weakens confidence in the law, makes judges approach future claims more skeptically, causes juries to become more cynical, or gives defense lawyers stronger arguments that the statute is being stretched too far, then many believe future claimants could end up paying the price for decisions made in this courtroom today. So yes, all eyes now turn toward Judge Lyman and whatever decision comes next. People are also watching closely to see whether Victoria Burke speaks publicly again, because her perspective has clearly become part of the larger conversation. And one thing seems obvious. This story is nowhere close to finished. The moment another courtroom update drops, people will be dissecting every twist, every legal move, and every new development, because this saga still looks far from over.